Does your team deserve better training and support? More investment in you? Meyer Fire University is an all-access platform that includes unlimited video lessons, 360-degree immersive simulations, quick-hitting software tools, and over 100 PDF tip sheets, flowcharts, and checklists. Help your team do better today. Visit MeyerFireUniversity.com.
Like and subscribe.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Fire Sprinkler Podcast. We are here at the CFAA Annual Education Forum in Vaughan, Ontario, here with Tim Renaud. Yes. Tim has started the CFAA podcast, CFAA podcast. So many acronyms in Sprinkler. The CFAA podcast, which is the Fire Alarm, Canadian Fire Alarm Association podcast.
That's right.
How long has it been?
It's been since January 1st, and it's going well. So far, it's growing every month, and
awesome.
It's really, we're trying to aim it towards the technicians, all these registered technicians, and really all the Canadian technicians across Canada. I'm based in Vancouver, British Columbia, and but I'm trying to make sure we've got content from all across Canada. So far, it's been a little heavily weighed towards the west because that's where I'm at.
Right.
But we're trying to get more and more, interviews right across.
So. You guys got the CFA. What's the total name of the podcast? Is it just CFA podcast?
Canadian Fire Alarm Association Technicians Podcast.
Perfect.
CFAA Technicians Podcast.
You got all that stuff right in the
Search CFAA on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You'll find it. It's the only one there. Yeah.
Where did the idea of coming up with the podcast come from?
From discussions, in my role, I work for Honeywell for Notifier, and in my role, going across Canada, it's been over and over I call it parallel effort.
Yeah.
All these people solving the same problems over and over and over again.
Yep.
Whether it's technicians, engineers, whoever it is. And trying to find a way of us having wider communication, just like you're doing in Sprinkler, right?
Yep.
We want to try and avoid that as much as possible and do the co-petitor thing, is it right?
That's right, yeah.
And make sure that we're working together to have a better industry together.
Right.
So in working on that, this was the best way to do it, was to do a podcast. I'm trying to do it so it's very consumable, 15 to 20 minutes, maybe half hour at max if it's really going along well.
Yep.
Or I make it 2 episodes if it's really a good conversation that doesn't need to be chopped.
Right.
And that's basically the crux of it. That was the idea.
Yep.
Started it last year, started talking to people about it, and more people were like, what a great idea, somebody needs to do this. So
yeah.
I'm a music producer, so for me doing podcasts was a nice blend of both disciplines together. So.
Do not compare the audio from mine to his. He's an audio guy and he just said it. Do not compare the two.
Do not compare the non-existent video of mine to his.
Perfect. Hey, I look way better on the video in your podcast.
I have a face for radio, so there you go.
It worked out good in everybody's favor.
Yeah.
So how often are you guys releasing episodes?
So every second week.
Okay.
I was going to do once a month, and then I just had so much content coming. We're preloaded. I was pretty much preloaded at the end of January, right to the end of June, with every second week. But you really helped me to manage my expectations on that. I remember our early talks on it, and making sure that even if I could do once a week, how long can I do once a week?
Yeah.
And I'd rather keep it consistent and manageable. When I get busy at work, you get busy at work. The podcast sometimes has to suffer a little bit. So we want to make sure still that everybody's getting consistent dropping of a podcast.
Yeah.
I've been consuming podcasts since 2007, and the ones that I consume the most are the ones that I know are coming.
That's right. Yep.
Consistently, right? So that's what we're trying to do.
Yep. And as somebody who has a little bit of experience in doing this, you will see as you're consistent with your episodes. Last year, I was the most consistent I had ever been. Mm-hmm. My viewership skyrocketed.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. So what type of content are you getting into? Are you getting into codes and standards? Are you getting into installation techniques, service techniques, stuff like that? What are people expecting from the CFAA podcast? So
we did start with really just a general overview, but we have some things. Actually, this year is such a good time for us to have started it. With the Canadian codes having been mandated to be updated by provinces this spring.
Yep.
And that whole National Building Code update ripple effect through all the standards that needed to be, the newest ones needing to be referenced, causes all these little nooks and crannies of ripple effects.
Yeah.
And it's so hard for anyone, especially a junior tech that's sitting and that's who I'm really trying to think about every time I do a podcast is, I don't want to insult the intelligence of those more senior people, but at the same time, And this podcast isn't really for them.
That's right,
We're in great rooms with great people, and we're fortunate to be sometimes in these great rooms and at these seminars and hear all this great information. Not every tech who's out there doing billable hours is able to do that.
Absolutely.
So this is more about them from the office to the job site getting that same information. So whether it's codes and standards, whether I have a podcast coming up where I'm talking to a guy who used to be a senior tech, now he's a fire consultant, and we just talked about troubleshooting and the psychology of walking on a site and having to troubleshoot, and the humans you got to deal with, the people who are probably stressed, they want you just to fix it, and all of that part, which maybe a junior tech's never heard.
Right.
And I'm trying to think of it from that side of, let's make sure that we're getting that information out there too.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So a lot of the kind of behind the scenes stuff that maybe you're not getting trained on a day-to-day basis. Right?
Yeah.
Talking about that stuff and the little nuances within the service industry.
Right, and making almost like a senior tech sitting in the passenger seat of your car while you're driving to the job site, and you're having that little 15-minute chat.
Yeah, one of the best compliments I ever got, actually Scott Pugsley standing right there, was the good thing about the podcast. It's behind-the-scenes conversation that happens at all the offices that it gives access to everybody in the industry.
No matter how big your company, how small, you have this outlet.
Right.
Yeah.
So kind of easy transition from there in the service aspect. One of the things that me and you have talked a little bit about in the past is the relationship between sprinkler and fire alarm technician, and not slamming a stake in the ground and saying this is my work, and throwing your hands up, but working together obviously for the common goal. Getting into things like pre-action systems, suppression systems, releasing panels and stuff like that. Obviously, there's a lot of very smart sprinkler fitters out there, 427A, sprinkler fitters, union, non-union, etc. A lot of them understand how they work, but may not necessarily understand the troubleshooting of a fire alarm system, the electrical components of that system.
Yes.
So as far as the jurisdiction is concerned, I think there's a lot of overlap between the two. I wouldn't call them separate industries, but separate aspects of the industry as far as who's responsible for what work. What are your opinions on that?
Yeah, I mean, I used to be a tech. I used to be a sales guy. I used to be a project manager at a fire alarm, always in fire alarm, but fire alarm sprinkler company, right? And having to even deal with internally the cross communication that can the communication breakdown just within a company alone. Then you get to intercompany breakdowns. I did a little pop quiz on the floor here with a couple of contractors just before I walked in here to do this recording. And that pop quiz. Pre-action. What's the first thing that causes you costing of money and costing money to the clients when you do a pre-action system? And of course, the hottest answer, which I already kind of expected, was who is doing the panel? Right. Sometimes the panel is missing from the scope for the fire alarm company, and they happen to see a pre-action system on there. They go, okay, mechanical is going to get that. Mechanical goes, oh, that's the Sparkies, that's fire alarm. I'm not touching the fire alarm panel part of this. I'll get this pre-action in, and nobody accounts for the panel.
I saw the pre-action system on the panel, but I very specifically omitted it from my quote, all fire alarm by others. Technically, the releasing aspect is a fire alarm device. Right? So,
but somebody has to understand your exclusion.
That's right.
Has to translate that to the owner. The fire alarm company has to be coordinated somehow to know, hey, we're also adding in a releasing panel here. Yeah,
because the argument that I always kick back, if they understand it or if I messed up, etc., is, well, it's not a fire alarm panel, it's a releasing system. So that's the conversation.
At the end of the day, somebody needs to pay for it.
That's right.
And somebody needs to account for it.
And it's not going to be me.
I mean, but it can be quite expensive, especially when we're doing this at the nth hour and trying to coordinate all this.
We need occupancy in a week and a half.
We don't have
nothing on the wall.
There's nothing. That's a big deal. Now the other pop quiz I said, because of course a lot of the qualification is, okay, as soon as you're talking coordination with sprinkler, we're talking about a gaseous suppression system. We're talking about pre-action. And so when we talk about gas suppression, so we're talking about Novec or whatever different kind of. When we're talking about those now, one of the ones, and I actually didn't think about this, and the contractor brought it up, is room integrity. Who accounts for room integrity? That's a big cost. Not only the room integrity, I may come in and do a first test, and there's a whole bunch of leaks. Who's paying for me to come do a second test, and who's fixing those leaks, and who's fixing them correctly?
That's right. Well, because that is a big aspect of it. If you have a system, a gaseous suppression system, the room integrity it depends on the amount of fluid or volume of concentrate, whatever is going to be in that system. Are you going to have a smaller bottle or a larger bottle? If you don't have room integrity, you may have to increase the bottle
Right,
size.
and as we know, anybody who's done these room integrity tests and tried to fix leaks, the larger the room, the more forgiving it is. When we get into a small server room, the smallest little ungasketed outlet can create issues, all these things. So those are sometimes, parts that we don't, who is grabbing that? Who's doing that part? Who's handling that? And so those things, I think, end up being for sprinkler and fire alarm. I think as soon as it's a releasing system, I think those questions need to be asked as upstream as possible.
Yeah.
And if everyone's more cognizant of that, I mean, again, these podcasts are good for that, but making sure no matter how big or small your company is, we all know that these gaps are out there.
Exist,
and being reminded, we've got to make sure of these.
Yeah, and how do we, as contractors, as even fitters in the field, when you get to a system, when you get to a project, you got a set of drawings and it's got a pre-action system. Early on in the project, maybe just the project coordination meeting, something like that. Hey, is there any discussion about the fire alarm panel, the releasing panel?
Right.
Now, a lot of the times I will say, early on in the project, the fire alarm contractor is not involved yet.
That's right.
They're not on site.
Yes.
But it could get the ball rolling with the general
yep.
contractor to reach out, say, hey, was this included in your scope of work?
Yeah, and as the sprinkler contractors being the leader in that, I mean, that's going to look good for you with that end user. You're the guy that just saved them a lot of money, the gal or the girl who saved them a lot of money initially on all this nth hour stuff.
Yeah.
They probably won't even see the cost savings that you just did with that little one question.
And it's not, it doesn't have to be a major. It's not a, throw a dart at the wall and hope, to hope to hurt somebody, but it's just raising the awareness and getting that kind of information.
Absolutely, and I think it's very important.
Yeah. Absolutely. Where can everybody find your podcast?
Okay, so simply search CFAA really on, I've done it myself, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you just search CFAA, you will find CFAA Technicians Podcast. And that's where you want to go. And we've already got quite a few episodes up there about codes and standards, about all kinds of stuff. So
what are the release dates?
Every second week, Monday.
Monday, second week.
Second week. So I just released S1001 updates this past Monday. So now you'll have 2 weeks to find a time to listen to that and all other episodes. And then we have a bunch of different episodes coming up. We not only talk about codes and standards or techniques. I have a 3-part series. I've done part 1 so far, all about women in fire alarm and their experience in fire alarm. As we know, that's sometimes a very different experience. And for all those young women who are considering maybe coming into fire alarm, if you have somebody that you just hired and she's just coming into the industry and is with a bunch of guys all the time and doesn't know what her experience, how it relates to the general women's experience in fire alarm, have that young woman or woman, whatever age, come listen to those podcasts. And again, you're in a room now with people of like mind, of like career, and hopefully that'll help.
It sounds like the CFAA podcast was a good primer for kind of what guys use my podcast for. On the way to work, they get a little primer.
Yes.
A lot of contractors and training facilities are using it. Hey, we're going to talk about the vapor shield tomorrow. So listen to this episode, get as much information, come with talking points.
Yes.
So that it's not a guy standing in front of a classroom talking. We
try to also do the same format as we do in CFA seminars, which is we don't really get it too product centered. It's about techniques, it's about code, and it's about applications. Product is a little bit, let's put that aside for now, and maybe it does, some once in a while it'll relate.
Sure.
But most of the time we're talking about the other parts of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Tim, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks a lot, man.
Awesome. Check out the CFAA podcast. This episode of the Fire Sprinkler Podcast is brought to you by the Laying It Down for Camp Bucko fundraiser being put on by the Fire Sprinkler Podcast. With local partners Wallace Kent Sprinkler, Troy Life and Fire Safety, Greater Toronto Fire Protection, Lamsar, and Joseph Hullage, with major provider of the fire hoses being brought to you by the Toronto Community Housing, we are well over the 63 kilometers required to break the world record. We're putting off the world record attempt until spring to allow for more donations to come in. www.firesprinklerpodcast.com for more information on how you can donate. Camp Bucko is the burn camp for kids of Ontario. It's open to burn survivors between the ages of 7 and 17. The camp has grown to over 70 children attending the week-long camp in August. There's no fee to attend Camp Bucko, and we'd like to keep it that way. Hoses are $20 a length to sponsor right now. All proceeds going to Camp Bucko. Thanks for your support.